Hello, my friend. Welcome to Origins. My name's Don Chapman. It's my privilege to be your host. You know, Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and we use it to validate the truth of creation. We have an incredible guest with us today. Dr. Don DeYoung is here, and he is the head of the science and math departments at Grace College in Winona Lake, Indiana. He's written 17 books on Bible science, on many topics, some very technical and others books that are object lessons for children. A fascinating perspective there. And his latest book is about the moon. It's called Our Creative Moon. And we're going to talk about that today because you have a fascination with the moon, don't you, Dr. DeYoung?
Well, I do, Don. There's something special about the moon. It's our nearest neighbor.
It certainly is.
And if we're going to understand anything about space, that's got to be the starting point, where the moon came from and what it's like. And so a lot of resources have gone into studying just what the moon is like. We might start just thinking a little bit about the size of the moon. One way to compare the moon would be to say if the Earth was the size of a basketball, then the moon would be the size of a baseball, four times smaller. Well, lots of work has been gone into studying the moon, and I thought what we might do is study three different aspects of it. First of all, where the moon came from, its origin. And then secondly, just how old is the moon? And then thirdly, is the moon designed? Is there purpose for the moon? Is it really important to us? And actually, this was one of the reasons for the whole Apollo moon project back in the 60s and 70s when we went to the moon. 12 astronauts walked around on the moon and studied it and brought back rocks that we're still studying today. That was one of the driving reasons for that whole project, to understand the origin of the moon from a scientific perspective. Now, it's interesting, over the years, there's been a variety of suggestions for where the moon could have come from. And we could take a little walk through some of these theories. Way back in the 1960s, if you would look up a chapter on the moon, it would mention the fission theory. This was the majority idea of the day that astronomers accepted for the origin of the moon. Now, the picture's a little misleading. Perhaps it looks like a bowling pin or something. Really but actually, the idea is that the moon, the suggestion, long ago, before anybody was on the Earth was young and molten and actually spinning very rapidly, and some material stretched off from the equator, fissioned off, and became the moon, as if it came from here. It's also called the daughter theory, as if the Earth gave birth to it. Well, it's kind of an exciting idea, but it went away in 1969. That's when Neil Armstrong and others walked on the moon.
First moon landing and
right.
then on the moon.
Brought rocks back to the Earth. And as we study them, moon rocks are not like Earth rocks.
How are they different?
Well, you still have basalt and other kinds of minerals up there, but let's say the proportions of the elements and the isotopes of the elements are different. There's just enough changes in the chemistry that it doesn't appear that the moon came from the Earth. And another idea, the moon has only a trace of water. And of course, the Earth is 3/4 covered with water. It seems like it would have captured a lot of it, and it's just not there on the moon. The moon looks different. So this majority idea went away. In fact, in the 1970s, the next theory, which was dominant in the astronomy world, is called the capture theory. And the suggestion this time is that long ago, the moon just came by here from somewhere else in space, and kind of comes in the bottom of this picture and goes swinging around the Earth, feels our gravity, and we reached out with our gravity and captured it, and it's been going around us ever since. Now, it's not really an origin theory. It comes from somewhere else, but we'll give them that. But there's other problems with this theory. You know, if a moon would come close to the Earth like this, it definitely would feel our gravity, and it would do a swing around. But after about a half a turn, you know what it would do? It's going to pick up speed. It's like a stone out of a slingshot, and off it would go. Here's another arrow over here kind of showing how that whole thing would
whirl
end
the
up.
slingshot. Every time you do, it's going faster, and that's what the moon would do, and it would just take off.
It'd be gone.
Yeah.
Yes. Some of our spacecraft still do this today. We call it a gravity assist. They pick up speed. It's like crack the whip. To capture the moon, you'd have to slow it down, put on the brakes, carefully insert it into orbit, and these natural origin theories don't allow you to do that. After capture, since it had problems, the next theory comes along. We have what's called the nebula theory. Now, the word nebula just means a cloud of gas or dust, and the thought is that you had these two clouds side by side, and they collapsed due to gravity, and so there formed both the Earth and the Moon. Actually, there still are a lot of nebula in space. They're colorful. We like to look at them with our telescopes, but there's something that these nebula are doing. They're spreading out. They're stretching out.
Yeah.
Gases like to expand, not come together. Now, the sun is gaseous and it stays small. Once you get it small enough, it'll stay that way. But how do you get it down to that stage? It's a fundamental problem with the nebula theory. We've had fission, capture, nebula. I've got one more natural origin theory, and this one's been around for a few years, and it's the one that you would still see today if you would look up the origin of the moon. Since nothing else works, what astronomers are talking about these days are catastrophes, major things that might have happened in space, and it's called the collision theory. The suggestion is that, long ago, this large space rock came flying through space and struck the Earth. Now, this just shows an asteroid or the heart of a comet or something, and they suggest that this is about as large as the planet Mars, and furthermore, that this rock just crumbled the Earth, broke it into pieces. And some of the fragments flew up into space and came together and made the moon, and then the remaining fragments fell back together to make the Earth. They don't have the details figured out yet, but it's called the collision theory. The Earth does get hit with small rocks now and then, meteorites. We can see those in museums. These origin theories just come and go one by one, and none of them seems to work very well. Artists have come up with interesting drawings of what it might have been like, however. Here's a drawing of a large rock hitting the Earth, so hard, in fact, that the space rock is melting. It's very dramatic in these pictures, but it's not real. It's
just fiction, yes.
And here's another problem, if nothing else causes the collapse. The moon's orbit is so circular as it goes around the Earth. If the moon had been captured, you wouldn't expect this. It would be a more lopsided orbit. On the other hand, if the moon had formed by fission, it would be directly out from the Earth's equator, because that's where it would have broken off. But nope, the moon's orbit is tilted. I think the Lord has made the moon with just enough differences and complications that it defies any natural origin explanation that you can think of. And so you come around to one more choice. And I don't mean the last choice, but I think it's the best one, to humbly say, maybe we can't explain the moon. Maybe it was placed in the sky by the Creator.
So every 10 years we come up with a new theory, and at the end of them we kind of go back to the explanation in God's Word.
I think that's where it ends up as
Yes,
these
sir.
natural theories roll on by. Now, some would say you can't do this because then you're talking about miracles and the supernatural. But you know, science is a search for truth.
That's right.
And if that's where it leads you,
If truth
so be
leads us
it.
to a Creator, then that's the truth.
Exactly.
Well, okay, now it's good to go from creation to the next part of our outline, and that is age, because that comes into play in that whole debate as well, doesn't it?
This age of the moon and the earth and all of space, it's a fascinating topic. The popular view today is that the moon is about 4.5 billion years old. Same for the earth and the sun and the whole solar system. That's what they say, 4.5 billion. I think this view needs to be challenged, and I think in the biblical view, the moon is much younger, much more recent, and there is data that points that way. We might mention a couple of them. In fact, the first one would involve craters. Now, the moon is covered with craters, large ones and small ones. If you look at an astronomy book, it'll say the moon doesn't change today. It's like a museum. It's still and quiet. And that all of those craters formed long, long ago in the early days of the forming solar system. And they might suggest that you could get another crater forming, another impact, something hitting the moon, maybe once every million years. In other words, you're never going to see one in your lifetime. But we have. There's interesting data. Now, this goes back a little ways, in fact, about 8 centuries ago, where there is documented history from Europe of people that saw a large new crater form on the moon. Now, actually, it was on the backside of the moon, but they saw this flash, they saw the smoke and the debris when this space object hit.
And that's been recorded.
Well, it is, of course, no cameras back then, but journal items of people who watched this. The moon got dusty and it seemed to vibrate for several days.
Wow.
Again, the astronomy world would say, now look, if it only happens every million years, what's the chance that it happened just a few hundred years ago and people actually saw it? So this is fascinating evidence that the moon may still be being cratered and that it's not something from long, long ago. As a matter of fact, we know where this object hit. Now, you know, we only see one side of the moon. It has a hidden side that's away from us. And in fact, this picture shows what you would see during a full moon. And there's one dark patch right up here called Mare Crisium. There's the next picture as well of a close-up of what's right around the back side of the moon where there's a fresh crater. And you can see how light that debris is. They've named this crater Bruno. It's about 14 miles in diameter. And we think this is the very object that was seen back then 8 centuries ago.
How can you tell a fresh crater from an old crater?
Well, the debris from a fresh crater is going to be lying over older material. And over time, the material gets darker just due to radiation effects. And we have all this light debris, which makes it look young and recent. This is fascinating that this crater is relatively young, just a few centuries ago. In fact, a creation prediction might be that we're about due for another one. That these aren't once every million years, but we've only got a few thousand years of history, and these things do happen. So that's Crater Bruno. They're still arguing about whether just what the Europeans saw, but it seems to be good evidence. Here's another fascinating area involved with the age of the moon. In the creation view, it appears to us that at some point in history, a lot of things changed. Things got out of control. Actually, I'm referring to the time of the Genesis flood, the greatest physical catastrophe this earth has ever faced. And we think that this may even have affected things like the moon and Mars. Now, here's a graph without any words on it, but it shows a peak. And again, it's clear to us that at some point in history, rates of change were speeded up, were accelerated. Radioactive dating was speeded up, and that's why we measure some old age for rocks, but that's because acceleration got out of control during the flood.
Are you saying that the Genesis flood was part of a bigger catastrophe that was going on in the whole universe?
That possibility, at least through the solar system, leading to cratering of a lot of our planets and such, which we don't see much of today. Here's another fascinating area involved with the age of the moon. I have a picture of the Earth here. And the red portions are where the high tides are, just a slight push out of the Earth. And here's the moon over here. Now, the moon causes the Earth tides by pulling on the Earth. This is this invisible gravity that we're aware of. And two things happen due to this tide connection between the Earth and the moon. First of all, the moon pulls on the Earth and is slowing it down. Now, it's very slight, but actually every 1,000 years, the length of a day decreases by about 1/100th of a second. And we can measure those small events. Not enough to affect our day, but the Earth has the brakes on. And over here on the moon, likewise, as the Earth pulls back, the moon is slowly spiraling outward from the Earth and getting further away from us. Not that you can notice that. The moon moves out about 2 or 3 inches per year.
Every year, the moon is 2 or 3 inches further away from the Earth.
Correct.
Okay.
But now in 10 years, 20 or 30 inches, and 100 years, it goes up and it adds up. Well, this becomes a fundamental problem with the geologic age of the moon. It's not linear. Actually, if you have the moon closer to the Earth, then it's moving a lot faster. If you have the moon twice as close to the Earth, it would be moving 64 times as fast. If you do the math of this, Don, what you calculate is that the moon would have been right in touch with the Earth. It would be right here up against us in about 1 billion years. I'm not saying that the Earth is 1 billion years old, but I'm saying the moon can't be anywhere near that old. Because if the moon is that close to the Earth, it would get torn up, it would mess up the place. What did we say? That the moon is said to be 4.5 billion years old?
Yeah.
But this is a fundamental problem, even with 1 billion years.
That's very fascinating, but with a young Earth, that's no problem at all, is it?
Well, it's not. In fact, with let's say a time scale of 6,000 years, the moon has only moved a few hundred feet, not enough to notice, and I think that's true since creation. So this is mainly a problem for evolutionary time, that the moon becomes uncomfortably close to the Earth. It would tear the moon into pieces. It would boil away the oceans. You just can't have what we're seeing today happening on a long time scale.
That's a fascinating piece of information that we need to know. Dr. DeYoung, we've got to take Dr. Don DeYoung, and we're talking about the moon, our closest solar neighbor. And we've talked about the origin of the moon and the age of the moon. Talk to us, sir, about design.
Well, the moon, Don, is designed. And that's I think the refreshing part of the creation view, that there's reasons and purpose. The moon's not there by chance or accident, but it's planned. And so the question comes up, what's the moon good for? Would you miss it if it was gone? You know, what does it really do for us? Well, if you look closely, there are reasons. We don't know them all, but the moon has much design as part of it. In fact, you can compose a list to get to thinking about it, and the list goes on and on. Of course, the moon is a night light. And some nights there's a full moon, some nights a crescent, some nights not a light at all, but it's important to agriculture. And I know we have street lights, but for a lot of the world, this moonlight is important, and certainly in history it has been. So we have the light aspect of the moon.
And could I just add to that, you know, one of the things as I get older that I see is just the artistry and aesthetics of God. I think when you talk about it being a night light, you have to add to it that it's not only gives light, but it adds beauty.
Well, it certainly does.
Yeah.
Any time of year. The moon is so faithful in its phases. If you get familiar with them, you can tell time by it. It's a clock. And you can tell direction by the moon. It's a compass. We've learned in just the last couple of decades that the moon stabilizes our seasons. And it's why we have summer, winter, spring, and fall.
Really? Okay.
Without the moon, the Earth's axis would wobble, and we would never know what's coming next season-wise. The moon is so dependable. You know, we can predict decades ahead of time when there's going to be an eclipse of the moon. And that's a fascinating area. There's actually two kinds of eclipses. One is when the moon moves through the shadow of the Earth and we have a lunar eclipse. It happens once or twice a year. And at that time, the full moon doesn't disappear, but it turns kind of a brownish red color as it moves in and out of the shadow. We know when this is going to happen years ahead of time to the very minute, because the moon in its orbit is following the gravity laws that the Creator established. The whole system is so dependable. There's another kind of eclipse that's even more interesting, and that's when the sun gets covered up, a solar eclipse. Now, most of us have seen a partial eclipse before when the sun is, some of it's covered, but especially glorious is a total eclipse. They're very rare. At a given point on the Earth, maybe once every 4 centuries does this occur, where it gets dark at noon and the stars come out and the birds get confused because they start to roost, and then 3 minutes later the sun comes out again. Well, I wanted to mention that we're living at a special time. In fact, across North America, in just a few years, we're going to have a total eclipse. And that shadow will move directly on a diagonal across the country as this map shows, and that's the year 2017. And some of us have waited a long time to see a total eclipse, so it's going to be rather exciting. And even though they're very rare, when they do occur, they come in pairs. So then there's going to be another eclipse in 2024.
Wow.
Just the exactness of these predictions that we can do this to the very minute, because there are laws of nature that keep the whole place dependable for us, established by the Lord. That season idea is kind of fascinating. You know, the Earth goes around the sun and keeps the same tilt, and so we have the sun above the equator in summer and below the equator in winter. And again, without the moon orbiting the Earth, the axis would change. And if the angle got smaller, then the seasons would go away. And if it got larger, seasons would be more dramatic. We need the moon to give us the seasons we have. And isn't that even what Genesis 1 says, that the moon is for days and seasons and times? It even gives us the seasons that we enjoy.
Wow.
We don't understand gravity, but the water of the Earth is pulled by the moon, and back and forth the water surges, and many of us have been to the shoreline to see that. Actually, there are some places on this planet where the tides are very dramatic, and there's an area up in Canada between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. It's the Bay of Fundy, where the tides change by 55 feet.
Wow, that's a lot of change.
There's a resonance there with this bay, which is hundreds of miles in size, as the water washes back and forth. And if you go up there, you can go to what's called Hopewell Rocks, and you can walk around on the floor of the sea when the tide is out. Wow. But then you better leave before the tide comes back, or you'll be 55 feet underwater, and it's just an interesting place. In fact, really, there's even a lot of energy potential there to harness that back and forth motion of the water, and in this day of energy shortage, that's being looked at, lunar energy from the tides.
I've never heard of that.
Well, this list that we've been talking about with all of the design of the moon and its purposes, I put one more at the end of the list and mention life. And by that, I actually mean your life and mine. There's something even more special about the moon. The tides keep the ocean stirred up, responsible for probably over half of the currents in the ocean. Well, there's a lot of life in the ocean, both animals and plants. There are floating plants, plankton, we call it the grass of the sea, and there's also kelp forests. And we remember that plants breathe the opposite of us. They give off oxygen. Current estimates are that over half of our oxygen comes from sea plants.
Wow.
Now think of this scenario. If there was no moon, then there would be no tides, the ocean would become stagnant, the plant life would die, there goes the oxygen, there goes us.
Wow.
I believe that our very breath is dependent on the moon keeping the ocean stirred up and healthy. And again, who knows what other ways that the moon protects us and takes care of us that we haven't even brought to mind yet. But I think this all makes the moon very exciting as just an interesting nearest neighbor of ours. We saw earlier that we don't know where it came from, and if we don't understand the moon from a scientific perspective, what do we know about as far as deep space? Creation just seems to cry out in every way. And the moon might be quiet in the sky, but there it is, a silent witness for us to enjoy and look at. I really think that the moon is one of the best witnesses that we have of the biblical supernatural creation.
It's a silent witness to our creation. I think that's awesome. You know, when I hear you talk about the moon, and I hear these other theories that it's spun off of the Earth or the Earth captured this thing that was flying by, any random explanation detracts from the obvious truth that the Earth needs the moon. And so God created the moon when He created the Earth to work together to sustain our lives.
Well, they do, and we still have a lot to learn about the Earth-Moon system. The more we see, the more we can see the Creator's fingerprint.
You know, if I were fascinated by your talk and had a great interest in space, and especially in our nearest neighbor, I'd want to get a hold of your book, Our Created Moon, Earth's Fascinating Neighbor, and look into that a little more deeply, because you've really whet my appetite to want to know all there is about that and to study it a little deeper. Thank you, sir. You've given us some great information and a great perspective that shows us so clearly God's design. In looking at the moon, we see His design for the Earth and for our lives and how much He cares about us. It's been a great gift you've given us. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Don.
And I hope you have enjoyed Dr. DeYoung being with us as much as I have, and I hope he's spurred your interest. You know, he's presented some information that really only creation explains, and I hope you'll wrestle with that. Remember, my friend, it's God's view that He created you. That should be your worldview, too. I hope you'll join me again soon here on Origins. And until then, God bless you, my friend.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. To get a copy of the information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 1108 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins, program number 1108, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.